She was the first queen of modern Greece, yet never truly accepted by its people. No children, no lasting throne, no love from the land she tried to call her own. Amalia of Oldenburg died quietly in Bamberg in 1875, at just 56. A life that ended in solitude, marked not by triumph, but by absence. The forgotten tragedy of a queen erased from memory while she was still alive. She was not born for greatness, at least not in the way history usually demands. Amalia Maria Frederica of Oldenburg entered the world on December 21, 1818, in the small German duchy of Oldenburg. Her father, Augustus, Grand Duke of Oldenburg, ruled a modest territory tucked in the north of Germany. Her mother, Princess Adelheid of Anhalt-Bernburg-Schaumburg, Hoym, brought lineage but little power. Compared to the colossal dynasties of Europe, the Habsburgs, the Bourbons, the Romanovs, the Oldenburg court seemed almost provincial. Yet this small court shaped her character. Discipline, restraint, and ceremony, the German way. Amalia grew up surrounded by order rather than splendor. She learned French and music, embroidery and etiquette. She was taught to walk with dignity, to speak with poise, to smile without revealing too much. Her childhood was not dramatic, not scarred by scandal, not defined by extravagance. Instead, it was a childhood of rules, rituals, and expectations, a steady preparation for a role she could not yet imagine. But Europe in the early 19th century was shifting. Napoleonic wars had ended. Borders had been redrawn. Empires rose and crumbled with dizzying speed. The great powers, Britain, France, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, played their endless game of balance, using royal marriages as pawns. For daughters like Amalia, destiny often lay not in choice, but in arrangement. She would not decide whom to love. She would be chosen, placed, traded. Still, those who met her remembered her charm. Portraits show a girl with delicate features, fair skin, and an almost wistful gaze. There was a certain brightness about her, an elegance that made her stand out even in her quiet court. Courtiers whispered that she carried herself with more presence than Oldenburg itself could contain. Her world, however, was confined. The duchy was no Paris, no Vienna, no London. It was a place of modest palaces and restrained ceremonies. Perhaps she dreamed of something larger. Perhaps she envied the glitter of Europe's great courts. Or perhaps she found comfort in the order of her small world. We cannot know. What we do know is that her life, once uprooted, would never again return to this calm simplicity. In 1830, when Amalia was 12, the Greek throne became the subject of European bargaining. Greece had just fought its bloody war of independence against the Ottoman Empire. The land was battered, its people exhausted, its politics unstable. Yet to the great powers, Greece was a prize, a symbol, a strategic foothold. They needed a monarch, a king who would not belong to Greece but to Europe, a foreign figure they could control. The choice fell on Otto of Bavaria, second son of King Ludwig I, young, Catholic, and politically malleable. Otto, in turn, would need a queen, a partner who could bring dignity, charm, and perhaps, most importantly, heirs. And so the search began across the courts of Europe. Amalia's name surfaced. She was young, attractive, and suitably royal. Not too powerful to threaten the balance of Europe, not too insignificant to insult the Greek throne, just right. Her childhood in Oldenburg could not have prepared her for Athens, a city scarred by war, half-ruined, restless, and hungry for recognition. Yet this was her fate. The girl who had once walked the quiet gardens of a northern duchy would soon find herself walking under the blazing Mediterranean sun, wearing a crown that was never truly hers. But before all that, before the dresses, before the gardens, before the downfall, she was simply a daughter. A young woman raised to obey the rhythm of dynasties. She had not yet known the cruelty of politics. She had not yet faced the pain of infertility, the sting of exile, the bitterness of being unloved. In Oldenburg, she was still protected, still untouched by the storm waiting across the sea. The irony is sharp. Her early years, stable and uneventful, stand in cruel contrast to the turbulence that followed. The child of a small duchy would become queen of a fragile kingdom, a symbol of promise turned into a symbol of failure. History often overlooks this beginning. We remember Amalia for her gardens, for her dresses, for her tragic end. But we forget the girl behind the queen. A girl raised among modest palaces and strict rituals. A girl who never imagined that her name would one day be tied to the fate of a nation struggling for survival. Perhaps in her final years, as she sat in exile staring out the windows of Bamberg, she remembered those early days, the snow-covered roofs of Oldenburg, the sound of church bells in the winter air, the quiet corridors where she learned to walk like royalty. Memories of a time when her world was smaller, simpler, less cruel. Amalia of Oldenburg began as a princess without ambition, without scandal, without tragedy. Yet destiny would carve a path of sorrow through her life. And in that beginning, in that quiet childhood, lies the cruel twist, that the girl who knew peace would end her days in solitude, carrying the weight of a crown that never truly belonged to her. She was 18, young, bright, still unshaped by the harsh winds of history. In 1836, Amalia of Oldenburg's life was pulled from the quiet rhythms of northern Germany into the raw heart of the Mediterranean. A marriage was arranged, not for love, not even for family alliance in the traditional sense, but for geopolitics. Greece was free. At least, that was the story the great powers liked to tell. After centuries under Ottoman rule, the revolution of the 1820s had left the country scarred but victorious. Independence came, but independence with strings. Britain, France, and Russia, the arbiters of Europe, demanded a king. Not a Greek, but a monarch they could trust. A monarch who owed his crown not to the people, but to them. Their choice fell on Otto of Bavaria, second son of King Ludwig I. He was just 17 when he was declared King of Greece in 1832. A boy, really. A Bavarian Catholic boy meant to rule an Orthodox nation, a stranger on a borrowed throne. 4 years later, he needed a wife, a queen who could bring charm, legitimacy, and perhaps heirs. The search stretched across Europe. Names were whispered, weighed, and dismissed. Finally, the crown settled on Amalia of Oldenburg. She was noble but not threatening, elegant but not too powerful. She carried no empire behind her, no ambitions of her own. She was perfect for a fragile experiment called Greece. And so it was decided. Amalia, barely out of girlhood, was told she would leave Oldenburg for Athens. She would become queen of a kingdom still finding its shape, still trembling between hope and ruin. For her, there was no choice, no debate. She was a princess, and princesses married where politics told them to. The wedding was celebrated in Munich in November 1836. Accounts describe it as glittering, a moment of promise. The Bavarian court dressed in splendor. The young king, serious and stiff, beside his bride, radiant in silk. The newspapers of Europe carried the news. Greece now had its queen, a symbol of stability, a symbol of modernity, a symbol of the future. But symbols are not always truths. When the royal couple sailed toward Greece, they must have sensed the weight pressing on their shoulders. Athens awaited them. But Athens was not Paris. It was a city scarred by war, its streets still half ruined, its palaces temporary, its people restless. The people wanted leaders who spoke their language, who shared their struggles, who felt Greek in blood and spirit. Instead, they were given Otto, a Bavarian boy, and Amalia, a German princess. The reception was not hostile at first. Crowds gathered to see them. Bells rang, cannons fired. The people wanted to believe. They wanted to believe that this young couple would bring prosperity, order, hope. For a moment, it almost seemed possible. But beneath the surface, the gap was already there. Otto spoke little Greek. Amalia spoke none. Their court was filled with Bavarian advisors, Bavarian soldiers, Bavarian habits. To the Greeks, their king and queen felt distant, foreign, almost imposed. The throne in Athens looked less like a crown of victory and more like another chain, this time forged not by Ottomans, but by the great powers of Europe. Amalia, for her part, tried. She smiled. She walked in processions. She wore dresses that blended Greek motifs with European fashion. She planted gardens. She waved to crowds. She wanted, perhaps, to be loved. And for a brief time she was. Her beauty was praised, her elegance admired. She became a figure of fascination, a foreign queen who at least looked the part. The people whispered about her gowns, about her bearing, about the grace she carried. But admiration is not the same as devotion. Respect is not the same as love. Inside the palace, the truth was colder. Otto struggled with governance. Factions split around him. Greece was restless, demanding a constitution, demanding self-rule, demanding voices in their own future. Amalia, though young, was drawn into politics. She advised her husband. She pushed for Bavarian appointees. She spoke with a confidence that was quickly resented. A queen's smile could charm, but a queen's interference could wound. And always, the question of heirs. The marriage remained childless. Every year that passed without an heir deepened suspicion, disappointment, anger. A nation still fragile needed continuity. A throne without a successor was a throne at risk. The whispers began. Whispers that she was barren. Whispers that God had cursed their reign. Whispers that Greece deserved better. The tragedy of Amalia's marriage is not just that it was political. It is that it was political without love. Political without children. Political without a bond to the people. A hollow foundation dressed in ceremony. From the very beginning, she was walking into a storm. She could not see it yet. She was still radiant, still full of youth, still playing the part of queen. But the storm was gathering in the mountains, in the streets, in the whispers of the people. This was not a marriage of two hearts. It was a marriage of nations, forced together by treaties and guns. And like many such marriages, it would not end in harmony. It would end in exile. For now, though, the year was 1836. A young queen stepped onto the soil of Athens. The people cheered, though not too loudly. The bells rang, though not for long. And Amalia, the girl from Oldenburg, stood beside her Bavarian king, unaware that her name would one day be remembered not for triumph, but for tragedy. Athens had never seen anyone like her, not in centuries. Not since the days when queens were legends in marble, not women of flesh and blood. Amalia of Oldenburg arrived with the poise of a northern princess, but quickly turned herself into an icon of the south. The city, raw and scarred from war, had little glamour to boast. Streets were dusty, houses half ruined, palaces unfinished. Yet in the middle of this ruin, the new queen brought something dazzling: style. She was young, beautiful, and full of energy. Her pale complexion stood out against the bright Mediterranean sun. Her auburn hair, braided and shaped with care, gleamed like copper in the light. Her features, sharp yet soft, carried the refinement of Northern Europe. In a land still uncertain of its place, she looked like a vision of grace. But it was not only her face that caught attention. It was her dress. Amalia understood that appearances were power. If she could not speak the people's language, she could at least wear it. If she could not claim Greek blood, she could drape herself in Greek fabric. And so, she created something new: the Amalia dress. It was a hybrid, part European, part Greek. A velvet jacket, richly embroidered, fitted tightly at the waist. A flowing skirt, long and elegant, inspired by local costume. A small fez-like cap adorned with a tassel. It was both foreign and familiar, both modern and traditional. In wearing it, Amalia made herself not just queen, but symbol. The people noticed. Suddenly, noblewomen across Athens began to copy her. Foreign visitors wrote about her elegance. Painters captured her likeness, ensuring that the Amalia dress would outlive even her reign. It became, in time, what we would now call national costume. A reminder that even queens can shape identity through fabric and thread. In portraits, she looks every bit the royal figure. Regal posture, serene eyes, delicate hands resting on embroidered fabric. Behind her, landscapes of Greece, olive trees, columns, blue skies, frame her as if she were part of the nation itself. For a time, it seemed to work. She looked like Greece's queen. She dressed like Greece's queen. She was admired like Greece's queen. But admiration is fragile. Fashion is a mirror, not a foundation. The Amalia dress could not erase the whispers of politics. It could not silence the resentment that Otto's Bavarian court provoked. It could not fill the silence of a nursery that never echoed with children's cries. Still, Amalia leaned into her role as cultural figure. She hosted balls. She appeared in public often, parading in her gowns, embodying elegance at every turn. She understood that in a kingdom searching for identity, image mattered. If the people could not love her heart, perhaps they would at least love her presence. And they did, for a while. Women in Athens began to imitate her hairstyles. Young brides requested dresses like the queen's. Foreign newspapers praised her as the stylish young monarch of a new European kingdom. To the outside world, Greece seemed modern, refined, even glamorous. Amalia was its shining face. But beneath the silk and velvet, cracks widened. The very elegance that won her admirers also made her seem distant. She looked perfect, but too perfect. To the struggling farmers and soldiers who had bled for independence, her gown seemed extravagant. To politicians fighting for a voice, her poise seemed cold. The queen of fashion was admired from afar, but rarely embraced up close. And fashion could not shield her from failure. She and Otto remained childless. Each dazzling gown reminded the people of what she could not give: an heir. Every embroidered jacket, every shimmering jewel, seemed hollow without a future to pass them down to. The more she embodied elegance, the more she embodied absence. Yet she persisted. Perhaps she believed image could still redeem her. Perhaps she believed beauty could soften politics. Perhaps, like many queens before her, she knew that if she could not rule, she could at least represent. There is a haunting irony here. The very thing for which Amalia is most remembered, her dress, her style, her gardens, was also what deepened her tragedy. She gave Greece symbols, but not stability. She gave them elegance, but not heirs. She left behind beauty, but not belonging. In the end, her fashion outlived her. The Amalia dress remains a piece of Greek identity, worn in national celebrations, remembered with fondness. Her gardens in Athens still breathe with life, yet her name, the woman behind the symbols, faded. It is as if she herself became like her gowns, admired, photographed, remembered in form, but hollow in substance. A queen reduced to fabric and flowers. And that is the cruel paradox of Amalia's reign. She shaped how Greece looked, but not how Greece lived. She gave them a dress, a garden, a mirror of elegance. But she never gave them what they truly demanded, a queen who was theirs. For in every gaze that admired her gowns, there was also a whisper. She is beautiful, but she is not one of us. Athens was raw, streets dusty, half-paved, houses patched with stone and timber. Ruins of Ottoman rule still scarred the horizon. A capital city in name, but in reality still a village wearing ancient bones. Amalia wanted to change that. She had always loved nature. In Oldenburg, she grew up among orderly gardens, neat hedges, flowers arranged like soldiers in formation. In Greece, she saw a city thirsty for beauty, a place that needed more than politics. It needed soul. So she began to plant. In 1839, just 3 years after her arrival, she commissioned the creation of a royal garden beside the palace. Not a small plot, not a simple grove, but a vast landscape designed to become the green heart of Athens. She called for exotic trees, rare plants, flowers from across Europe, palm trees from the Nile, jasmine from Italy, oaks from Germany. It was as if she wanted to stitch the world into Athens with roots and petals. The work was immense. Engineers reshaped the soil. Gardeners laid paths, dug fountains, carved out shaded walks. Amalia herself oversaw the details. Letters describe her walking among laborers in the early morning, pointing here, correcting there, insisting that every tree be placed with precision. She wanted order in a land of chaos. She wanted beauty where there had been ruin. And slowly, the garden took shape. Olive trees stood beside roses. Cypress cast long shadows over marble benches. Exotic plants mingled with local herbs, creating scents that drifted across the city air. In the evenings, Athenians wandered near the gates, catching glimpses of fountains and flowers. They marveled. For a city still scarred by war, the garden felt like a promise that Greece could be more than survival, that it could breathe again. The garden became her legacy. Even now, it lives. Today it is called the National Garden, still a refuge of shade in the center of Athens. Generations walk its paths without remembering its maker. Yet in Amalia's time, it was her pride. Her attempt to root herself in a land that never truly accepted her. But even gardens have thorns. For some, her project was a gift. For others, a reminder of distance. She brought foreign trees, foreign flowers, foreign tastes. To critics, it felt less like a Greek garden and more like a Bavarian dream transplanted into Athens soil. She wanted to beautify the capital. But many whispered she was once again imposing herself on the land, reshaping it in her image. She was loved for her gardens, but hated for her politics, one historian later wrote. And that paradox began here. Still, Amalia sought comfort in the work. She walked the paths often. She planted flowers with her own hands. For a woman who could not bear children, the garden became her child. Living, growing, rooted in Greek earth, even if she was not Visitors remembered her fondly in these moments. A queen among roses, speaking softly with gardeners, bending to admire a new bloom. For a moment, she looked less like a monarch and more like a woman longing for peace. The people might criticize, but the plants did not. In the garden, she could be both queen and exile, creator and dreamer. But outside the gates, Athens remained restless. The constitution crisis brewed. Political factions sharpened their knives. Otto's foreign advisors deepened resentment, and Amalia herself, though she longed to be seen as mother of the nation, became instead a symbol of distance. The garden could not mask the growing divide. Yet the irony remains. Of all her efforts, the balls, the dresses, the ceremonies, it is the garden that endures. Not her throne, not her marriage, not her policies, but her flowers. Even today, as tourists walk through the shaded paths, as children play beneath the trees she once ordered planted, her ghost lingers. The queen without an heir left Athens, a living heir nonetheless, a green sanctuary in a city of stone. And perhaps, in her last years, as she stared from the windows of exile in Bamberg, she thought of that garden, of roses blooming in spring, of jasmine at dusk, of olive trees whispering in the wind. Perhaps she consoled herself with the thought that, though she had been rejected, something of her had taken root in Greece. But gardens, like queens, cannot stop time. The same people who once admired her flowers turned their backs on her crown. The garden lived, but Amalia faded. In Athens, the flowers bloomed. In Bamberg, she withered. A crown is heavy, but heavier still is the silence of an empty nursery. Amalia and Otto were married for nearly 3 decades, yet never once did the sound of a child's cry echo in their palace halls. No prince, no princess, no heir, only silence. In a kingdom as fragile as Greece, that silence was unbearable. At first, people waited patiently. The queen was young, after all. A child would come. Surely a child would come. But months became years. Years became decades. And with each passing season, the whispers grew sharper. She cannot bear children. The marriage is cursed. God has punished them. History does not give us clarity. Some sources suggest Otto may have been infertile. Others hint at miscarriages, quiet tragedies never spoken of in public. Still others point to illness or incompatibility. What is certain is that the royal couple never had children. And in monarchy, that is more than personal sorrow. It is political catastrophe. For Amalia, the pain was double-edged. On one side, the private grief of a woman denied motherhood. On the other, the public scorn of a queen blamed for failing her nation. In 19th century Europe, a queen's first duty was not charm, not politics, not gardens. It was to produce heirs. Without heirs, she was seen as incomplete. The palace must have felt hollow. Vast rooms without laughter. Corridors without the rush of tiny footsteps. Instead, only the rustle of silks, the echo of formality, the chill of unbroken quiet. To outsiders, the palace gleamed with ceremony. To Amalia, it must have felt like a tomb. Her gardens flourished, her dresses dazzled. Yet her womb remained empty. That contrast was cruel. She could plant roses, but not sons. She could design gowns, but not dynasties. The people noticed. In a country still stitching itself together after war, succession mattered more than style. Without a child to inherit, Otto's rule looked fragile, temporary, doomed to collapse the moment he died. Opposition leaders seized on this. Pamphlets circulated. Whispers turned to accusations. The queen was barren, the monarchy was doomed, and every whisper was a dagger. Imagine the weight of those years. Every time she walked in public, eyes followed her belly. Every time she smiled at children, whispers followed in her wake. Every illness sparked gossip. Perhaps this time she was with child. But no announcement ever came. No bells rang. No cradle was prepared. Her letters reveal little. She kept her grief private. But silence can scream. The absence of words, the absence of heirs, the absence of hope, all of it became the shadow under which she lived. Otto, too, must have felt the sting. Yet in patriarchal fashion, blame fell mostly on Amalia. She became the target of frustration. She was the outsider who gave no heir, the foreigner who gave no future. In truth, the tragedy was larger than the couple. Greece itself suffered for it. Without a dynasty, without continuity, the throne seemed borrowed, fragile, artificial. Many Greeks began to question why they endured foreign rulers at all. Why should they bow to a Bavarian king and a German queen who gave them no bloodline, no sons, no sense of permanence? Amalia tried to compensate. She threw herself into cultural projects, dresses, gardens, public appearances. She wanted to be loved, if not as mother, then as queen. But the absence of children overshadowed everything. There is a cruelty in history's memory. Even now, when her name is spoken, it is often followed by a single fact. She bore no heir. All her elegance, all her gardens, all her attempts at belonging, reduced to the absence of a child. And perhaps the deepest wound of all is this. Childlessness made her powerless in both life and legacy. Without children, she had no anchor in Greece. Without heirs, her memory dissolved quickly after exile. A queen forgotten not only by her people, but by time itself. One can almost imagine her walking in her garden at dusk, touching roses with her hands, whispering to herself. Surrounded by blooms, yet none were hers. Surrounded by life, yet none born from her. For a queen, this was more than personal grief. It was the end of her reign before it had even ended. A throne without heirs is a throne already collapsing. And so, the silence of the nursery became the silence of the crown. The palace without children became the kingdom without future. Amalia of Oldenburg, Queen of Greece, lived in that silence for nearly 30 years. A silence that echoed louder than any applause she ever received. The crown sat on their heads, but their words never reached the people. Otto and Amalia were foreign rulers in a land that had bled for its freedom. They spoke German at home, French with diplomats, a little Italian in court. But Greek? Hardly at all. To the ears of the people, their king and queen were strangers speaking in borrowed tongues. This was more than inconvenience. It was alienation. Greece in the mid-19th century was fragile, restless, loud with demands. The revolution had promised liberty. What the people wanted now was not just independence from Ottomans, but independence from outsiders. They wanted Greek ministers, Greek soldiers, Greek voices in power. Yet when they looked to the palace, they saw Bavarians, foreign advisors, foreign officers, foreign customs. Amalia was not blind to this. But she did not bend. She inserted herself into politics, often with blunt confidence. She urged Otto to appoint Bavarian officials, men she trusted, men she believed could bring order. She thought she was strengthening the throne. Instead, she was tightening the chains of resentment. Every foreign face she placed in power widened the distance between queen and people. And the people noticed. Pamphlets spread in the streets, angry speeches rose in the assembly. Priests thundered from pulpits that the monarchy was un-Greek, ungodly, a betrayal of the revolution. Amalia's name became a lightning rod. She was loved for her gardens, but hated for her politics, a historian would later write. The line captures her perfectly. The woman who gave Athens flowers also gave it fury. The queen who planted roses also planted resentment. Even her appearance fed suspicion. Dressed in velvet, crowned with jewels, she seemed to live in a world far removed from the dusty markets and hungry villages of her subjects. When famine struck parts of Greece, when corruption eroded local trust, the sight of a queen in imported gowns seemed like mockery. And Amalia, with her sharp will, often made it worse. She was not meek. She was not silent. She advised openly, argued openly, interfered openly. The people did not see her as a passive consort, but as a foreign hand pressing on their politics. A Bavarian queen ruling a Greek people. The gap grew wider. Otto too suffered from the same distance. He had promised to grant a constitution, but delayed year after year. He clung to absolutism in a nation born from rebellion. When soldiers and citizens demanded rights, he wavered, then resisted. And beside him, always, was Amalia, urging, advising, deciding. She had once believed that culture could win hearts, dresses, gardens, ceremonies. But politics was sharper than silk. The Greeks might admire her style, but they distrusted her influence. Rumors spread. Some accused her of plotting against constitutional reform. Others whispered she was manipulating the king for her own ambitions. None of this was entirely true. But in politics, perception is often stronger than fact. The perception of Amalia was fixed. She was foreign, she was meddling, she was unwanted. By the 1850s, the resentment was no longer whispers. It was anger in the streets. Protests, petitions, threats. The people who once greeted her with cautious curiosity now shouted her name with venom. Imagine her standing at a palace balcony, looking down at a crowd not of admirers, but of protesters. Banners raised, voices shouting, words like foreigner, traitor, curse. For a woman who once dreamed of being mother to the nation, it must have felt like betrayal. But in truth, the betrayal was hers. Or at least, that is how the people saw it. The irony is cruel. She had wanted to bring Greece order, culture, refinement. Instead, she became the face of division. The queen who could not speak their tongue, could not bear their airs, could not feel their struggle. And so, the political distance hardened into political hostility. By the late 1850s, the monarchy teetered. Opposition grew louder. Foreign powers withdrew support. Within Greece, the cry for self-rule, for a native king, became irresistible. And when the crisis finally erupted in 1862, it was not just Otto who was targeted. It was Amalia too. The people had endured a foreign king, but a foreign queen who interfered in politics? That was too much. Her gardens still bloomed. Her dresses still glittered, but none of it mattered anymore. In the eyes of the Greeks, she was no longer a queen. She was a stranger occupying their throne. The distance had become a chasm, a gulf no rose, no gown, no smile could ever bridge. The storm had been gathering for years. By 1862, it broke. Greece was restless. Discontent brewed in taverns, in markets, in the barracks of soldiers who had once fought for freedom, but now felt chained again. Otto and Amalia had ruled for nearly 3 decades, yet they remained outsiders. No heirs, no constitution that satisfied the people. no bond of blood or spirit. And so the people rose. It did not happen in silence. Crowds filled the streets of Athens, voices sharp, banners high. Students shouted, priests preached. Soldiers, weary of Bavarian officers, muttered their defiance. What began as discontent turned into open revolt. In the palace, Otto and Amalia felt the walls closing in. Their court, once glittering with ceremony, now echoed with fear. Advisors whispered warnings. Loyalists grew scarce. Outside, the chants grew louder. Down with the king, down with the queen. Imagine Amalia at the balcony, the same balcony where once she had waved in silk gowns, admired for her poise. Now the same space showed her a sea of anger. Faces twisted with rage, words hurled like stones. The queen of gardens, the queen of dresses, was no longer admired. She was despised. Otto, desperate, tried to salvage the throne. He promised reforms. He appealed to loyalty. But it was too late. A monarchy without children, without trust, without roots, could not stand. For Amalia, the fall was personal humiliation. She had given her youth to Greece. She had built gardens, shaped fashion, tried to play her part. Yet the people saw none of it. To them, she was not a mother, but a foreigner. Not a queen, but a meddler. Not a gift, but a burden. In October 1862, the revolution erupted in Athens. Soldiers mutinied. Politicians abandoned the king. Crowds stormed the streets. Otto and Amalia had no choice. Their reign was over. The escape was not regal. No procession, no farewell ceremony, only flight. The royal couple slipped away under heavy guard, leaving Athens behind. The city they had tried to shape with gardens and palaces spat them out. The people did not weep. They cheered their departure. Bells that once rang for their arrival now rang for their exile. Picture the scene. A carriage moving through the night, wheels grinding over cobblestones, carrying a king and queen who had lost everything. Amalia, once radiant in silk, sat pale and silent. Otto beside her, broken. Around them, guards moved nervously, fearing attack. Behind them, Athens glowed with unrest. Ahead of them, only uncertainty. They boarded a ship. The same sea that had once welcomed them now carried them away in shame. Waves lapped at the hull as the city of Athens faded into the horizon. For Amalia, it must have felt like death. Not of body, but of identity. She was no longer queen. She was in exile. And what was left? No throne, no heir, no love from the people she had tried to rule. The fall of 1862 was more than political change. It was the end of a dream. The dream that a Bavarian king and a German queen could become the heart of a Greek nation. Instead, they became reminders of foreign imposition, of promises broken, of distance that never closed. History remembers the revolution as swift, decisive. But for Amalia, it was slow-motion devastation. Every chant in the streets was a reminder of failure. Every banner waved was a denial of her crown. Every whisper of foreign queen cut deeper than any sword. When she left Athens, she left behind more than a throne. She left behind the garden she had planted, the dresses she had designed, the hopes she had carried. She left behind a country that never truly wanted her, and she carried with her only silence. The silence of empty rooms, the silence of betrayal, the silence of a crown slipping into the sea. Amalia of Oldenburg entered Greece as a bride of promise. She left it as a queen of failure, and in that departure, her tragedy sharpened. For exile is not just loss of place, it is loss of self. The uprising had stripped her not only of power, but of identity. Without Greece, without crown, without children, who was she? A woman in exile, fading before she was even gone. Exile is not always chains. Sometimes it is quieter. Sometimes it is simply the sound of being forgotten. After their fall in 1862, Otto and Amalia returned to Bavaria. Not to Munich, the bustling capital of Otto's youth, but to Bamberg, a smaller city with winding streets and solemn churches. There, far from Athens, they lived like shadows of themselves. The carriage that carried them into Bamberg was not greeted with cheers. There were no crowds, no processions, no triumphal arches, only silence. They were not celebrated rulers returning home. They were failures, tolerated but no longer admired. For Amalia, the exile cut deep. She had spent half her life in Greece, shaping gardens, dresses, ceremonies. Now, all of it was gone. In Bamberg, she was not a queen. She was simply a woman displaced. Her crown still polished, but meaningless. Her title hollow in the cold German air. The couple settled into a residence near the old palace gardens. The irony was bitter. Amalia, who had once planted life in Athens, now stared at someone else's trees, someone else's flowers. Gardens still bloomed, but none were hers. Their daily life was quiet, too quiet. Otto, broken by the loss of his throne, withdrew into melancholy. He spoke often of Greece, of what might have been, of betrayals and mistakes. Amalia listened, but she too was drowning in silence. The couple had no children to fill their rooms, no court to fill their days, no purpose to give rhythm to their time. She was 50 when exile began, old enough to understand that her story was already written. Too late for redemption, too late for heirs, too late for return. Visitors described her as withdrawn. Once admired for elegance, she now appeared pale, austere, wrapped in dark gowns. The fire of her youth, the ambition that planted gardens, designed dresses, argued politics, had dimmed. She looked like someone waiting, not living. Waiting for what? For history to remember her? For Greece to call her back? Or simply for death? She often sat by the window. Locals whispered of seeing her gaze out for hours, motionless, her eyes fixed on the streets below. Perhaps she imagined the sun of Athens instead of the gray Bavarian sky. Perhaps she remembered the olive trees, the fountains, the palace gardens she had once nurtured. In Bamberg, memories were all she had left. The silence of exile is cruel. It does not shout. It erases. In Athens, her name faded quickly. New rulers replaced her. The gardens remained, but few remembered their maker. The dresses she designed were still worn, but the queen behind them became a ghost. In Germany, she was tolerated but not celebrated. She belonged nowhere. And exile has another cruelty. It turns time into weight. Every year in Bamberg was another year of invisibility. Every season that passed was another season where she did not matter. For a queen, irrelevance is worse than death. Her letters from this period are scarce. She wrote less, spoke less, engaged less. It is as if she had already vanished, even before her body gave way. Some evenings, she and Otto walked the streets. Locals recall them as somber figures. The fallen king, tall but stooped, and the queen beside him, quiet, almost spectral. They did not command attention. They blended into the background, monarchs no longer. Exile stripped them of grandeur. It left them as relics in their own lifetime. For Amalia, the tragedy was not dramatic, but slow. Not execution, Not assassination, not violent overthrow. Instead, it was a long unraveling, a slow descent into invisibility, a queen fading, not falling. And perhaps that is the cruelest fate of all. To die, not with a bang, but with a whisper. To live years knowing that your crown, your gardens, your beauty, your efforts, all of it had been erased before you yourself were gone. By the early 1870s, Amalia's health had begun to fail. She grew weaker, often confined indoors. Otto, too, declined. Together, they were a portrait of loss. Two figures once dressed in ceremony, now reduced to silence. And in Bamberg, the people passed them by. A few remembered who they were. Most did not. Children saw only an old couple staring out of windows. History had already closed its book on them. Exile was not chains. It was emptiness. And Amalia of Oldenburg lived in that emptiness for 13 long years. The end came quietly. Not in Athens, not beneath the sun of Greece, but in Bamberg, far from the land she once tried to call her own. On May 20th, 1875, Amalia of Oldenburg died. She was 56. A young age for a queen, yet her body had long carried the weight of grief. Official records speak of heart disease, of physical decline, of exhaustion. But those who remembered her whispered a simpler truth. She died of sorrow. The years of exile had drained her. The silence of childlessness had hollowed her. The rejection of a nation had broken her. What remained in Bamberg was not a queen, but a shadow, living on borrowed time. In her final days, she rarely left her rooms, curtains drawn, candles flickering. The once vibrant queen of Athens now lay in bed, pale and thin, her hair streaked with gray. Servants came and went in hushed tones. Otto, himself frail and melancholy, stayed near her side. Two exiled monarchs, stripped of thrones, stripped of heirs, waiting together for an ending. One imagines her last thoughts. Perhaps she remembered Athens in spring, the jasmine blooming in the gardens she had planted. Perhaps she thought of the Amalia dress, still worn by women who had long forgotten its creator. Perhaps she longed for the children she never held, the nursery that never was. But history gives us no such certainty, only silence. Her death did not echo across Europe. No great bells tolled, no royal cortege marched, no crowds gathered to mourn. Her funeral was modest, almost private. In Greece, the land she had once ruled, the news stirred little grief. The people had already turned the page. The queen without heirs, the queen in exile, her death was barely a footnote. And yet, for those who had known her, the sorrow was real. She had been elegant, determined, dignified. She had tried in her own way to give Greece beauty, culture, and refinement. She had loved gardens, loved fashion, loved the idea of belonging. But life had denied her its simplest gifts. The absence of children haunted her to the very end. For a queen, childlessness is not merely personal. It is political. It erases legacy. It leaves no bloodline to carry memory. And so, Amalia died not only without heirs, but without anchors. When she closed her eyes, her story had already begun to fade. The tragedy of her death is not its manner, but its meaning. She was not assassinated. She was not executed. She was not consumed by scandal or war. She simply faded, worn away by sorrow, erased by silence. In exile, queens do not fall with drama. They dissolve. And so it was with Amalia. On the day she died, the palace in Bamberg remained still. Outside, life went on. Carriages clattered over cobblestones. Church bells rang their ordinary rhythm. Children played in the square. None of them knew that inside, a queen had breathed her last. The contrast is haunting. The world moved forward. Amalia did not. Otto outlived her by just a few years. He too carried the sorrow of exile to his grave. Together they were remembered less as rulers, more as relics of a failed experiment, a Bavarian couple planted in Greek soil, uprooted before they could ever belong. But if history forgot her, the garden did not. In Athens, the national garden still bloomed. Roses opened, cypress cast shadows, fountains spilled water into stone basins. Life persisted in the green sanctuary she had once envisioned. Visitors strolled its paths, unaware of the queen who had made it. Flowers remembered her, even if people did not. Her death, in the end, was an ending without spectacle, a final act written in whispers, not shouts. And perhaps that was fitting, for her life itself had been marked not by triumph, but by absence. No heir, no throne, no return, only sorrow. And in that sorrow, Amalia of Oldenburg slipped from history. What remains of her? Not power, not heirs, not a dynasty, only fragments, a dress, a garden, a name half remembered in footnotes. The Amalia dress lives on in festivals, worn by women who may not know its origin. The National Garden of Athens still shades tired travelers, still blooms each spring with flowers she once chose. These are small things, fragile things. Yet they are hers. Amalia of Oldenburg died in solitude, forgotten by many, misunderstood by more. But her life is a reminder. Not every queen is measured by victories, by heirs, by power. Some are remembered only by traces, a hem of fabric, a tree that still grows, a silence that lingers. And perhaps that too is enough. For even in exile, even in sorrow, even in death, she left beauty behind.